This training course is designed for you to repair your furniture by yourself. You will see you don't need any expensive tools or equipment for this work. With ordinary, simple tools that are found in almost every home, except perhaps for a professional stapler, you will be able to perform the vast majority of repair and reupholstery work on soft furniture. So, I am pleased to present to you the training course Major Repair of Soft Furniture. Beautiful and comfortable. This profession consists of several specialties. Here, it is necessary to have carpentry skills, tailoring skills, and skills of a seamstress. It is also necessary to be able to perform some locksmith work. But all these specialties are not so complex that a person who understands what a tool is and knows how to hold it in their hands cannot master them. Even if you do not have the skill of working with your hands, and you decide, perhaps as a hobby for variety, to engage in this activity, nevertheless, there is nothing here that is so difficult that you could not learn it. Well, let's move on to the more practical part of what probably interests you, first and foremost. What tools and equipment are necessary to engage in this work? These are pliers, tongs, screwdrivers, chisels, and wrenches. That is what is practically found in every home. Let's focus a little more on a specific tool that, if you don't have it, you will definitely need to acquire. So, let's go in order. If we are talking about repairing a soft swan, it involves working with fabrics. Therefore, you will definitely need good sharp scissors. Specifically good ones, not just sharp scissors with small ears, but proper dressmaking scissors, because you will need to cut not only fabric, but also denser materials like lathe or non-woven fabrics. Therefore, you will need good scissors. You will also need these kinds of cutters to bite the staging sample. When working with springs, when you encounter broken springs, this tool is very useful and necessary. In addition, when working with springs, when we discuss this, you can make a simple tool, a simple device, a hook, with a bend. But this is very helpful for unscrewing and screwing in the coil. In addition, what is necessary? For working with foam, you will preferably need a large knife with a long and thin blade, very sharp. You will also need large needles for this work, including these kinds of needles. Again, they can be made by yourself from hardened rod, sharpened, riveted at the edge, drilled, and a hole made. These are for such large needles. Well, needles of this size will also be needed. They are sold very cheaply. Among the necessary tools, of course, are staplers. It is quite possible to manage with a good mechanical stapler. Also, when it comes to power tools, a screwdriver will be very needed. The screwdriver should be powerful enough because you will need to drive quite a few screws. including large screws. It doesn't have to be super professional, but it should be reliable enough, because there will still be a load on the screwdriver. As for the electric drill, it is an ordinary household drill. There won't be a heavy load on the drill in this work. Sometimes it is necessary to drill into wood, even less often into metal. What you will definitely need is a sewing machine. This sewing machine, again, is the simplest but reliable. The vast majority of work on soft furniture and sewing covers can be done, including on a regular household sewing machine. Of course, it is preferable to use an electric or foot drive so that both hands are free for work. So, if we talk about the necessary tools, that's practically everything. If desired, one can purchase a sander, a small woodworking machine, or a circular saw with a planer. It's optional, but during training, it is not necessary for most tasks. Although I am certainly not against mechanization, not against modern expensive power tools, not against pneumatics, and so on. This is how you can organize a workshop. This is the necessary tool. In principle, as you can see, there is no need to make any serious investments. Where to start? The actual work on repairing upholstered furniture, if you want to learn this. In order to gradually do this in your profession, it is also best not to start looking right away. Specifically clients, that is a specific person to whom you will be repairing this furniture, it is best to find old furniture, repair it, tidy, and sell it online or in some other way, in the case when you are repairing your furniture. And preparing it for sale, you are not limited by time. You also determine the quality of work and the nuances, to what extent you plan to perfect this product. The buyer will then see if they like it or not. But I will emphasize again, at the first stage, you do not bear responsibility for someone else's furniture, for someone else's fabric directly in front of the client. For starters, for the first orders, this is better. At one time we worked exactly like that. For a long time we primarily worked for sales. Well, later we transitioned to working directly with clients. What is the advantage of working directly with clients? You are not dependent on when the seller sells the furniture, and you do not invest your own money in the work. But for starters, it is best to repair your own furniture at home. Later on, to find and buy used furniture that needs repair, fix it, and try to sell it. Well, also, if you already gain the courage and skills, you can start working directly with clients to carry out major repairs on specific pieces of furniture. Well, so in general, this is almost everything regarding the organization of the workshop, tools, equipment, and how to start working. In this work, just like in any other, there is a very important point. These are the safety rules. This work itself is not very hazardous, but any actions, if performed incorrectly, can be harmful to health. When it comes to upholstered furniture, the first thing you encounter when repairing it is the need to move it. Upholstered furniture can be quite bulky and heavy, so it is important to remember that almost all upholstered furniture can be disassembled, and it is always better to disassemble it as much as possible on site and then transport it to the workshop rather than straining your back or arms, trying to pull it out of the house, load it into transport, take it to the workshop, and then disassemble it. The same goes for the reverse process. After assembling it in the workshop and checking how it works, you can often quickly remove some heavy parts and components of the furniture and then fully assemble it on site. This will help you preserve your health. In addition, during work, especially during disassembly or when removing old varnish from varnished parts, it is very important to use a good dust mask and, if necessary, goggles. For example, if you are going to cut something with a jigsaw, which hasn't even been mentioned yet, it is rarely needed. But when it is, be sure to use goggles, especially if you will be working perhaps with a circular saw. So, a mask and goggles should also be in your arsenal. In addition, good gloves are also necessary for this work. The main thing is that they should be work gloves, so that when you are working with knives, for example, when cleaning varnish, your hands are as well protected as possible. Also, during the varnishing work, you will be protecting your skin from chemicals. The basic safety rules for a hammer and screwdriver. These tools can cause you quite serious injuries if used improperly, and a workday, or maybe even several, will be lost. How to properly drive nails. It seems simple, right? But there are a few nuances. When we place a nail and hold it, the first strike should not come from the shoulder or elbow, but from the wrist. It should be a light tap like this. Moreover, before the hit, it is advisable to place the hammer and slightly tap it. After that, we drive it in with stronger blows. Speaking of screwdrivers, when we work with a screwdriver, we often hold the screw with our hand. If there are devices for magnetizing and the screws are magnetized to the screwdriver, that is ideal. But if not, and if the screw does not hold well enough, we place it like this, not holding it with our hand, and screw it in. If there is no other option, and the screw needs to be held for some reason, then under no circumstances should you hold the screw like this. Why? Firstly, you can injure your finger with the cutting edges. Secondly, when applying pressure, especially with insufficient experience, the screwdriver can slip to the side, and you might, as they say, tear your finger. What should be done in such cases? In such cases, you need to hold the screw like this. Not like this, but like this. By holding it here and touching the screwdriver with your hand, you apply the screw to the place where it needs to be screwed in. With such short movements, you secure it, that's it, and then you can screw it in all the way. Such elementary things, but if you don't know them, if you neglect them, you can injure your fingers. And, of course, it won't just be unpleasant, but in general, you won't be able to work for some time. Well, of course, working with knives. In this case, as we mentioned, when cutting foam and stripping old varnish, you will be using knives. It is preferable to use sharp knives. Therefore, a few rules. Never work with a knife towards yourself. Never work with a knife in such a way that there is enough free movement of your hand to injure yourself. This rule should also be followed, and whenever possible, use thick gloves when working with knives. In the lesson regarding varnishing, and in the lesson where we will go step by step through the repair of a chair, where we will have to work a lot with such a knife, we will discuss in more detail how to make this work effective and safe. But in any work, try to be attentive. Be careful. Then the work will bring you pleasure. And no unpleasant situations will arise. So, I wish everyone success in further mastering this profession. I am sure that this information will already be quite useful to you. And also be assured that all the other knowledge you will acquire in this training course will be professional, accurate, and effective. Today, we will talk about an integral part of upholstered furniture, such as lacquered details.
Although soft furniture is primarily covered with fabric, lacquered details make it much more beautiful. What lacquered details of soft furniture do we encounter? Well, first of all, these are, of course, chairs. Chairs, for the most part, consist of lacquered wooden parts. Also, many types of soft furniture have armrests. If we take soft furniture for repair and do everything, change the fabric, put the most beautiful fabric, but the armrest remains like this, faded and scratched, then, of course, we cannot say that the soft furniture has become beautiful. Therefore, it is very important to re-lacquer this armrest. So, the first action. The first action that needs to be taken regarding this armrest that we will tidy up is to remove the old lacquer. This is the most labor-intensive part of the work, and what scares many and deters them from updating their lacquered furniture themselves. Armrests, chairs, legs, and so on. What is needed to remove the old lacquer? I personally still use this kind of tool. After trying different methods of removing lacquer, drum sanding, chemicals, whatever, I ultimately settled on a good shoemaker's knife. I use drum sanding for working on such rounded surfaces where it is inconvenient to use a knife, and I will show how this is done. If you don't have a sander, if you don't have drum sanding, but need to remove lacquer, let's use this tool. What is it? This is a knife made of very good thick steel. A knife for removing lacquer should have a short blade. It can be a little longer, maybe like this. It should not be flexible, so a knife like this will not work for us at all. The blade should be thick, not very long, and not flexible at all. It should be rigid. The knife should be very sharp. At the same time, the surface should not be absolutely flat, but for example, it should have a slight oval shape over 3 to 4 centimeters, no more than half a millimeter, at most 1 millimeter. This will help us avoid making scratches on the wood when removing the lacquer. How to use this tool? First of all, it is important to remember about safety precautions. And as we discussed, in such cases, it is very important to use thick, good gloves. For safety, the knife should be used away from yourself, like this. Then we won't injure ourselves. At the same time, there should be no knife strikes. Otherwise, a deep groove may remain, which will penetrate the wood and be harder to sand. The movement should be sweeping, gradually bringing the knife closer to the surface. Well, if slowly, then like this, and we touched, like this, and we touched, and from this vesta it happens like this. At the same time, you see that with this knife, when the varnish on the infrared is quite severely damaged, the old varnish is removed very quickly. We do the same in the other direction. Observably, after several passes, look, the armrest is almost cleaned. But such a movement can be difficult to make. The hand gets tired quickly. And sometimes you really want to start moving in that direction because it's physically a bit easier. But there is a risk of injuring the supporting hand because the knives are sharp. In this case, either when the part does not allow you to move only backward, if there is a bend somewhere, or if there is this chair, and you need to move the knife here.
Here, it is important to follow a very important rule. There should be support for the hand, and the movement should not be from the elbow, but from the shoulder. What does this mean? For example, if we are holding with our hand and need to move in this direction, if we move from the elbow, the knife can slip and we could seriously injure ourselves. In this case, we need to stand closer and move the hand from the shoulder so that the forearm rests against the body, like this, and for education. If we move this way, we have a natural support, and we won't hit the knife on the supporting hand. In extreme cases, similar movements on the body and hand are necessary from running, and we should try to do all the work from ourselves. We also need to try to look at the light. It is easy to see where the remnants of varnish remain, and it must be removed, because where the varnish remains, the stain will not absorb, and we won't be able to level the color. To prepare the armrest for varnishing, sometimes the varnish on the armrest is much thicker, so it may take more time and effort. However, using a sander or drum sanding does not guarantee it will be faster. Nevertheless, if you have a sander, use it. Here, I show what to do if you don't have special tools. Of course, we also remove the varnish from the sides. So, the varnish has been removed from the flat surfaces, but it remains on the rounded edges. Here, it is harder to use the knife, but it is possible with such a short movement This is how you can remove it. And later you can finish cleaning with regular sandpaper or use power tools. So, mechanically and with some use of power tools, we have removed the old varnish. What needs to be done now? We need to sand this armrest. For this, we will use these sanding sponges. This is a sponge with an abrasive coating. There are larger and smaller ones. First, we will use the larger one. Literally, just a very few movements are usually needed. Then we take the finer one and perform the same operation very carefully. You can check the quality of the work by removing the glove and running your hand over it. The surface becomes very smooth. For some reason it is very smooth. When we apply the stain will slightly raise the wood grain. The better it is sanded, the less fuzzy the surface will be, and the less stain we will use for the coating, the easier it will be to work. So, after such preparation, we can apply the stain. I use simple alcohol-based stains, which are very good. The color range here is sufficient. When choosing a color, usually when recoating, it is necessary to cover the part with a stain that is slightly darker than the color that was there, because, as you can see, the varnish has worn off, but the stain that was applied penetrated deeper into the wood in some places, and it is often not possible to sand it out completely. Moreover, this is not wood, but pressed plywood. And if we go deeper, we can simply uncover the next layer of plywood, and between them the glue will appear, which the stain will not absorb at all. And then we will no longer be able to restore this armrest. Therefore, in such cases, especially if the part is made of plywood, it is not advisable to sand too deeply, because the glue that this plywood is bonded with will show through, and the stain will not absorb into it, resulting in a light spot. Therefore, in this way, if we have darker spots left, this is not varnish, but old stain. We simply take a stain of the same color or slightly darker and even out the color. How do we apply the stain? First of all, we put on gloves again because the stain can heavily color the hands. So, the table is wiped, and we can apply the stain. We will apply the stain using this kind of foam sponge. Why foam and not a brush? Foam absorbs more moisture, and once soaked, you can cover a larger area. And this way, we start working. This type of gloves allows the stain to absorb into the skin more than varnish. In the end, you can thoroughly go over the entire surface to ensure the stain evenly tones the wood. And this is what our armrest looks like. Now, it is necessary to let the stain dry. Earlier, I prepared another armrest. Here it is. The stain is already dry here. Do you see the difference in color? It's a bit darker. When drying, the stain becomes lighter. We are sending this to bend. What do we do next? You cannot cover it with varnish yet. After the stain has dried, you can run your hand over the smooth surface. it has become slightly rough, despite the fact that we sanded. Some wood fibers still rise with the stain, so we take fine sandpaper and go over it again, not pressing too hard to avoid completely sanding off the stain from the edges. We go over the surface literally a few times. This is how we sanded them. You can also take a dense, non-fuzzy cloth and wipe off the dust that has formed, and additionally sand it again. Now the armrest is ready for us to apply varnish.